Well, after that happy tune to bring us in from coffee into our session, I would like to welcome you all today to our session where we're going to be looking at accelerating climate action through good governance. My name's Harriet Bulkeley. I'm a professor at Durham University in the UK, and for reasons that are probably not unknown to most of you, also at Utrecht University in the European Union. So today's session, we're going to be exploring how and why mainstreaming climate change across city government is so necessary for successful climate action. We've got some fantastic speakers and a panel of experts, and we're going to hear from them and the leadership that they're offering in putting this into practice. So what I'm going to do today, you'll know that we're running a bit over time. We will be running into the lunch hour. We'll be finishing approximately 12, maybe 13 minutes past 1, but I promise you that it will be worth it to get all of the wealth of experience and expertise we have gathered here today. So I'm going to first welcome each of the keynotes, one after one another, and they will each give us their perspective before we move into the panel discussion. So I am delighted to welcome Grete Faremo, Under Secretary General and UNOPS Executive Director, to the stage to give us our keynote. She has a long and distinguished career in the government of Norway, including most recently as Minister for Justice and Public Security. And before entering politics, she worked both in the financial and software sectors of the economy. And I'm greatly looking forward to hearing her perspective. Thank you, Grete. Please join the stage.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction, and good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to see you all here and to address the importance of good governance to fight climate change. The role that our cities and their infrastructure can play in our efforts to tackle climate change is critical. And just to highlight, last year, UNOPS and the University of Oxford carried out research that found that quality infrastructure influences 92% of all targets across the now well-known 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Cities, as you all know, present both a challenge and an opportunity for climate action. They house large populations with concentrations of poor and marginalized groups. Many are located in coastal areas exposed to increased risks from rising sea levels, and because cities are hubs for government, commerce, transport, and culture, they use a large portion of the world's energy supply and produce most of our greenhouse gas emissions. You will be familiar with the scale of this challenge. Over half of the world's population now live in cities. By 2050, that number is projected to reach almost 70%, and close to 90% of this increase will take place in Asia and Africa. As things stand now, our cities are ill-equipped to cope with a changing climate. Many lack infrastructure designed to withstand the impacts of the climate crisis. The organization that I lead, UNOPS, UN Office for Project Services, I could call us the workhorse of the UN, has a mandate in infrastructure. We build roads, we build homes, we build hospitals, schools, we build water and waste management plants, which also address the primary sources of plastics and pollution reaching our oceans. But first and foremost, we engage with our partners and relevant stakeholders to better understand the needs, the challenges, to provide the best solutions. Our joint choices now will determine how sustainable, resilient, and inclusive our cities will be tomorrow. We all have a unique opportunity to make the right decisions to create cities that work for all, now and in the future. We also know decisions made now will lock in development cycles, both positively and negatively. Urban infrastructure is built to last. If we build without considering the needs of the most vulnerable, we perpetuate inequalities. Good governance is about how to make those decisions, who makes those decisions, and how those decisions are implemented. In UNOPS, our approach is ensuring that all views are represented to secure inclusion of the most vulnerable. It means being transparent about the processes and practices applied so that corruption is minimized and public resources are used efficiently and effectively. Importantly, good governance means responding to the present and future needs of societies, including the threats from a changing climate and more extreme natural events, as well as population growth. You are all here because you are committed to making your cities more sustainable and inclusive. Quality urban infrastructure is key to achieving this. It connects populations with education and job opportunities. It drives economic growth and can help reduce income inequalities. For example, I like examples. In Buenos Aires and Bogota, over many years, we have been working home by home, upgrading and rebuilding homes as part of nationwide social housing projects. We factor in people's even individual needs, and by working directly with families and communities, infrastructure becomes the trigger for social development and self-growth. We have upgraded homes across Haiti, Colombia, and Argentina using this community-led infrastructure model, training and building the skills of communities as we go, investing in clean water and homes to reduce poverty and hunger. Another example is from South Sudan, where as part of school building projects, we work with community leaders, reassuring fathers of the safety of their daughters, factoring cultural sensitivities into the infrastructure designs, and building safe toilets and bathrooms encourage the girls to attend. Pragmatic, practical solutions. At UNOPS, we also have a mandate for procurement. In Mexico City, UNOPS supports the city government to procure electric buses for a greener future. Through efficient and transparent purchasing, we help the city government to improve public transport at very favorable prices while reducing the city's emissions. The solution underpins the creation of a more sustainable green city. It helps drive green economic growth. These are examples. We also know scale matters in cities. Providing affordable social housing to a fast-growing population is a crucial step in reducing urban inequality and foster productive, sustainable communities. A key focus of the UNOPS's Social Impact Investing Initiative is to provide affordable housing to low and middle-income families, mainly in bigger cities. And here, UNOPS has taken a catalytic role. We also invested, actually, some of our own reserves to demonstrate we are serious. This initiative will be hosted by Helsinki, the capital of Finland, and has the support of the government of Finland. What we do is bringing private and public partners together with governments to build innovative solutions to development challenges at scale. Responsible private investors help generate social, environmental, and economic impact while making a financial return. This initiative has grown across the Caribbean, Ghana, Kenya, Mexico, India, Pakistan, and it's now the world's single most ambitious affordable social housing projects, building in the order of 850,000 new homes. Still, of course, within the framework of what good governance requires, working with the local and the central authorities in the countries we engage. And they go, of course, beyond building houses. They mean building factories to provide the material for the construction of the homes. They provide local jobs, and they mean use of local supply chains, etc., etc. My time is up, but I was hoping that I gave you some of these examples of how good governance is implying engagement with local communities at regional level, at national level, find out what all the stakeholders need and ensure we build the sustainable solutions. And we need to act now. All the best for the rest of the conference. Thank you.
For taking both that large overview of the challenges, but also for the interesting examples that you shared with us. And now for our city keynote, I'm very pleased to welcome the Mayor of Lima, with a distinguished political career and a background both in the academic and legal professions, a strong commitment to social issues as well. We look forward to hearing your perspectives on how you're putting your agendas into action on the ground. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all. Thanks to the support of C40, we are currently working on the development of Lima's Climate Action Plan. We start this work in February this year and must be ready on September 2020 in order to be presented to the citizens of our city. This plan is very important for the city because it will set us goals for the city until 2050, and we should have the proposals of projects and initiatives that we must implement to achieve the goals for the city. To develop the plan, we have determined two working groups, one political and the other one technical. In the political group, the managers in charge of the offices of transport, urban development, risk management, among others, are who review the main work guidelines. In the technical group, we count the participation of the officials who report to these managers and who are specialized personnel with whom we hold work meetings. This group meets more regularly and allows the plan to be moved forward. Also, for the plan, it is necessary to include people that is from the outside of the municipality. And we have achieved that through the Metropolitan Environmental Commission, we involve all the districts of the Metropolitan Lima, as well as representatives of civil society, business, and the academy. Lima has established a forum known as the Metropolitan Environmental Commission in response to the framework law of the National Environmental Management System. The Commission covers the 43 districts of the metropolitan area and facilitates proactive work in the various districts, entities, and stakeholders. The Metropolitan Environmental Commission, CAM, was created by municipal ordinance, which creates the Metropolitan Environmental Management System as an instance of coordination and multi-sectoral coordination that contributes to the solution of the environmental problems of Metropolitan Lima through dialogue and agreements between the public, private, and civil society sectors. The Metropolitan Municipality of Lima, in the framework of the implementation of the Metropolitan Environmental Management System, formed the first CAM in 2009. For the current year, the new formation of the CAM was carried out 2019-2020 period, establishing 26 members, consisting in 62% public institutions, 19 private institutions, and 19% civil society. Likewise, the CAM has 5 metropolitan technical groups known as GTM, made up of specialists who function to analyze and propose technical agreements to address specific issues of environmental management. Within this GTM, we have solid waste management, air quality management, ecosystem management and conservation, governance and environmental citizenship, climate changes, and water resources. It has the 2018-2019 Metropolitan Environmental Agenda, within which some multisectoral actions have been worked in an articulated manner with various actors through the CAM and the GTM, and one of them being the strengthening of server capacities municipal audiences for the development of local environmental management instruments. Likewise, the CAM and the respective GTMs prepare their annual work plans, which include the planned actions of the environmental agenda and other prioritized actions of a multi-sectoral nature that help to solve the environmental problems of the province of Lima. An example of how the GTM and the CAM help in the environmental governance of the city, we find the design of environmental management instruments. For example, the GTM of Ecosystem Management and Conservation developed an ordinance model on the management and conservation of coastal hills for districts in the province of Lima. In this regard, this served as a model for the municipality of Villa María del Triunfo to approve its own ordinance that declares the Lomas de Villa María as a local interest. The Environmental Council of Children has been added to these spaces a few months ago. In this space, girls and boys between 6 and 12 years participate and appear, having as a reference to the council children of the mayor. They are people that give me several ideas in order to govern the city. This council integrates the Lima network of girls and boys of the city, which is constituted by local governments, civil society, and universities in order to promote and develop a safe, inclusive, and sustainable city from the eye of the children. The Environmental Council of Children seeks to generate improvements in the city environmental management proposal, focusing solutions toward the well-being and inclusion of children. Participants receive talks and dynamic workshops on different environmental issues like air, noise, waste, green areas, among others. Then they visit city spaces. Finally, they reach a list of ideas, suggestions, and recommendations to be implemented. Solid governance structures are vital in the success on the climate action planning. In Peru, it is very common that when a government changes, local or national, it does not continue with the programs and projects directed. This permanently delays the country's development because institutions are weakened from political and individual interests. Likewise, many plans are made in the cabinet without involving the people who are going to be affected or benefit by the changes, limiting the sense of appropriation that citizens must have of these instruments. That is why, when we decided to start the Climate Action Plan, we did it within the Metropolitan Environmental Commission. We believe that this will reinforce the sense of ownership over the content and the projection of the plan from the different stakeholders that participate in this process. This guarantees sustainability and permanence in time of the commitments assumed, because it is these actors involved who will ensure that this is the case. In this way, we will also prevent changes in political government from altering the course of changes that the city needs. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mayor, for your insights into the very into the very detailed work that's involved in undertaking careful good governance, and also for your leadership in involving youth in your climate action. Thank you. And I understand you won't be able to stay with us for the session, but we hope we'll see you elsewhere in the conference over the next days. Okay, well, it's now my pleasure, without knocking any more furniture over, to welcome the panelists and for the beginning and an opening up of our discussion in the room. And I would like to remind you that you are also able to ask questions to the panelists through the marvelous conference app. Some of you will already downloaded it. If you haven't, you can do that now. And you'll need your registration number to register for the app. And we'll be taking questions, a few questions at the end of some initial panel discussion. So please get those questions coming, or the academics in the room will ask them all. Okay, so if we could start, I would love to welcome the Deputy Mayor of Seattle, Shefali Ranganathan, up to join us on the panel. Shefali runs 13 departments across the city, and she leads an agenda for the expansive involvement of communities in the work of the city. So thank you very much for joining us. Looking forward to hearing your work. Ms. Heidi Sorensen, she's director of the Oslo Climate Agency, a leading global example of how institutional innovation can really drive change at the city level. We'll hear wonderful things about the work that you're doing as well. The Mayor of Helsinki, Jan Vapaavuori, roughly, thank you for your patience with my pronunciation, has brought an ambitious agenda to the city of delivering the best possible conditions for happy everyday city life. I think this is your ambition, and good governance is going to be essential to getting us there. And last but not least, the Mayor of Aarhus, Bundsgaard. Thank you, Jacob. One of the longest serving mayors, I think, since 2011 you've been a mayor, and now as chair of the National Association of Danish authorities, so lots of experience there to draw on as well. So thank you, panel, for joining us. And I am lucky enough to get the first question, so I'm going to ask you all if you might just care to reflect on an opening question, and I'll gather all of your reflections, and then I'll ask some more specific questions about the things that you're doing. So perhaps, the one thing that we all want to hear is really, what's the secret ingredient? What's the one kind of magic ingredient or most important factor for you that is making governance work in your city towards your climate ambitions?
So I think for the city of Seattle, the recognition that when you put people at the center of climate change policy, what you end up realizing is the impact is disproportionate. For communities of color, low-income families, who tend to be the least likely to create these emissions, but their impacts are most significant. So in Seattle, you see there are communities that are seeing excessive heat pollution, and these are communities of color. And so what we want to make sure is that we're putting those communities at the center of that decision making, so that those, they also bring to the table the most important solutions. And so we are trying to make sure that we can lift up those solutions without reinventing the wheel.
Yes, thank you. Since I'm a bureaucrat, I think I could be allowed to say that the most important ingredient is political will. And we have a lot of political will in the city of Oslo. We have a climate strategy stating that we should reduce our emission by 2030 by 95%. That's basically becoming a zero-emission cities in the next 10 years. But having said that, I also think that putting people in the center, telling them that if we achieve these targets, Oslo will not only do good things for the climate, but it will become a better city. And also acknowledging that people are, to some extent, not so very happy about change, and meet them face to face, help them finding climate-friendly solutions in their everyday work is crucial, because good governance is about having a good relation to the people in the city. There's no way around that. So the combination with a lot of political will, good work with the people in the city, but also, of course, good governance systems that effectively put political will into practical actions, I would say.
Because I'm partly politician, I agree with you that political will is the most important factor, but because I'm also partly a bureaucrat, I also have another answer, and I think that our single most important ingredient is a holistic view. In Helsinki, and I mean in at least in all Nordic countries, we do not aim to peak our emissions because we did it already 20 or 30 years ago. We don't aim to reduce our emissions a little bit because we have done already quite a lot. In Helsinki, we have been able to reduce our emissions by 45% per capita since 1990. But as we heard just a few moments ago by the new chair, Garcetti, that's not enough. We are really committed to become carbon neutral by 2035, and in order to make that happen, you have to have a holistic view. You need to understand that you can't neglect any single sector, that you have to understand that every single action you make in a city, small or big, has to contribute to your climate action plan.
I believe that the issue of climate action is somewhat different from a lot of other policy areas that we are focusing on, because obviously you need, in order to produce the good governance necessary in order to take the necessary action, you need a target. You need to set an ambitious target. Most cities can do that, and are doing that at the moment. But in reality, in many ways, often as political leaders, we are trying to push for change in different areas, and we need to get the citizens to come along. In terms of climate actions, it's a little bit the other way around, because the citizens are demanding action. The citizens are actually setting the ambition higher than the politicians in many ways. So we need to catch up as politicians in many ways in this field. The city of Aarhus set a fairly ambitious target back in a little more than a decade ago. In 2008, we set a target that we wanted to become CO2 neutral in 2030. And now we're halfway there. And we've done all the easy stuff. And now we still need 50% reduction. And it's all the difficult stuff that is left. So we really need to accelerate. And obviously good governance is hugely important in order to make sure that decisions that we are making in this process, living up to the expectations of the citizens, are done in a way where it's still seen as legitimate action. So we also need to mature this political conversation and put it in there with all the other important stuff that we do in terms of providing good schooling, good daycare, elder services, social services. And this is a competition also in terms of resources. So I think the next level of good governance in this field is to mature this discussion and making sure that we take legitimate actions.
Very interesting, thank you. There's already a lot to get into and think about, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about the specific things that you're all working on. So maybe, Vice Mayor, if I could turn to you to tell us a little bit more about what Seattle is doing. And we know how committed you are to ensuring that the benefits of climate action are far-reaching, and ensuring then this dialogue with those communities who may be most affected by climate change, but equally this, potentially least engaged. And could you tell us something about the kinds of programs and initiatives you've been putting on the ground to bring these people into your agenda and to communicate with them and engage them in your action?
Sure. So earlier I talked about how a people-centered approach to climate policy is how we see good governance in the city of Seattle. I'm going to tell a little story. So we have a small high school in the southern part of Seattle. It is primarily low-income students of color. And for years, they had been asking for free transit passes to take free transit. And these kids organized, they petitioned city government, they protested at City Hall, So in 2017, when Mayor Durkan came into office, we were talking about this, and we were talking about more ways to get more climate-friendly transportation options, and then she just said, well, these kids already have the answer. Why don't we just make it free for them to ride the bus? And so that's what we did, right? It was a community-centered solution. So now every high school student in the city of Seattle has a free bus pass that they use throughout the year. And essentially what you're doing is you're creating a culture change, right? These American cities are very car-oriented, and we are creating a generation of transit riders because we have made it easy for them to access those services. We have a tool that we use in our decision-making in Seattle government. It's called our Racial Equity Toolkit. Basically, it looks at, as we think about policies and investments, who benefits and who is impacted by those policies and investments. And it is a very deliberate way to make sure that we are instituting policies and making investments that are not harming communities, that are lifting communities up. And we try to bring people into decision making. We have the ability for residents to weigh in on budgeting, on projects, and then a very sort of community-centered focus. Seattle's very diverse. We have lots of languages, lots of different ethnicities and communities. We have a Department of Neighborhoods that has a very focused community program that engages with communities who aren't part of the process. So, for example, we have a large East African community in the city of Seattle. We have culturally appropriate engagement. We have basically trusted ambassadors. So we pay people from their community to engage with city government, because these are traditionally communities that don't trust government. And so how could we bring them in? How can we see what their priorities are? And, just make sure that we are doing what the community wants.
So it's really a lot about going to where people are already in their lives and engaging with them there and making that part of what your agenda can be. That's really important, really interesting to hear about. So if we turn to Oslo now, where there's also been a lot of innovation, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, but I think one of the things which stands out, of course, is one of the first cities in the world to produce a climate budget, and as recently as 2016. So we realize it's early days, but we'd love to hear a little bit more about why you decided to adopt it and how you think it's working.
Thank you for that. I think it is our most important innovation so far, and it was 4 years ago when Mayor Raymond Johansen came into power. They decided they wanted the climate budget. The motivation behind it was that they had seen both on national and local level for many years that there had been targets that never had been met. There had been action plans with a lot of action that actually didn't happen. So they wanted a governance system that was more binding and putting the climate action in core of the decision-making process in the city. So therefore they came up with the idea that the climate budget should be like we were budgeting the reduction of climate emissions the same way that we are budgeting finance. So now, this autumn, for the 4th time, the city government had put forward a climate budget, and it's always chapter 2 in the ordinary budget, and it's owned by the Department of Finance, and that's crucial, because it should be equally important to count your climate reduction as it is to count your money, and everybody knows it's important to count your money. So, as the head of the climate agency, we are preparing the budget, the climate budget, and work closely together with the officials in the Department of Finance to have it through. And then it's decided by the city government, and after that the city council. So, but the most important thing is that every entity will then get a responsibility for a measure, and they have to report on that measure 3 times a year together with the ordinary financial report. So that's also done to the Department of Finance. This is so, and this is all done transparent. That's also quite challenging, but also very beautiful, because you can read that there are areas that we are actually not meeting the targets as we hoped. And that is sometimes a little bit difficult for a bureaucrat to present to a politician, but extremely important. And this is the actual moment where I respect our politicians most, that they have let us put forward, say, this is not good enough, here we need more. And then we can focus and find new measures and have a transparent and open dialogue with the population on fallow ground. And I think that's a very important part of the climate budget.
Yeah. So both the robustness of it, the regularity of it, and the transparency of it, which allows difficult messages to be discussed because of the framework that it gives, in a way, that you can then have those difficult conversations. Fascinating. Thank you very much. And so if we turn to Helsinki, I have the impression that the level of ambition is very high. And I really liked your comments in the opening question that every little thing counts, that there can't be a decision at the city level that doesn't involve a consideration of climate change. So I'm wondering how you're going about thinking about mainstreaming climate change across the city in such a way that these decisions are taken with climate in mind. Thank you.
We do not have the most ambitious climate plan in the world compared to Copenhagen and some other cities, but it's quite ambitious. But we may have the most detailed, most concrete, most operative action plan in order to make that happen. So after the City Council unanimously actually approved our commitment to be carbon neutral by 2035, we had a cross-departmental working group which worked on an action plan, which then later on was approved by the city board, consisting of 143 different single action points, this whole exercise was then, of course, based on the best possible data we had at our disposal. So we calculated that, first of all, where are our emissions coming from? And then after that, we find action points for each and every source in order to tackle that. We're able to produce that kind of action plan. And we believe that if we follow that, if we fulfill all 143 action points, then we will be carbon neutral. And then, of course, the next step is that understanding that if and when we have that many action points, it is clear that all departments are involved, some in many points, but everyone at least somewhere. And then the next stage is, of course, to monitor it, to measure it, and to report to the city management group on regular basis in order to see whether they are, whether the path is going on in a speed good enough. So you have to be systematic. It's a question. It's a combination of a efficient and inclusive structure, and then strong leadership. Like forcing each and everyone taking seriously what we have promised to do.
Yeah. And so that's then the challenge of finding your carbon footprint in that kind of level of detail. It's quite a challenging science, but once you have that, then again, you can kind of use it to say, well, here is where we need to prioritize. So it's about setting priorities and being efficient in those spaces and then holding people to account as well, of course. So thank you. I'm getting notes about time, but it's all right. We're fine. So if we could turn now to Aarhus and hear a little bit more about the ambitious actions that you're taking. As I understand it, there's now a Danish version of the Deadline 2020 program that you've been part of, and I'm wondering, what do those kinds of programs that are working at a national and an international level, how do they help you kind of mainstream climate change and reach those kind of ambitious targets that you have?
Well, first of all, gives us a common language to understand and measure our actions up against others, which is hugely important in order to make sure that we're doing enough and doing it fast enough. And the sense of urgency in this area is very, very high, and so we're using it to benchmark ourselves against others in order to make sure whether we are a success or not. and also in a political sense, so that the opposition can criticize us when we're not doing enough, or the citizens can criticize us when we're not doing enough. And that's very important, and also a part of the sort of maturing this discussion and this policy area. I believe there's a very important strategic decision that you need to make quite early on. One, because the municipality of Aarhus it's the biggest employer in our municipality. So you can decide on whether it's your own sort of provision of services that you're measuring, or is it the city as a whole? And in order to meet the ambitious CO2 targets and meet the Paris Accord, you need to look at it as a city, all in all. So you need also the citizens to come along. So you're both playing a role in terms of reducing your own CO2 footprint as a municipality that provides services, but you're also a catalyst and need to be able to organize and inspire and motivate local communities, individual citizens, in order to change their habits. So all the easy stuff is the structural stuff. How do we reduce our energy in terms of creating heat and electricity? How do we convert our public transportation from fossil fuel to electricity? And all that stuff is basically the easy stuff. They can be complicated and they're very big investments, but it's easy to make that kind of decisions. The difficult stuff is when you ask the question of, should we change the habits on what we eat, or how we transport ourselves, and how we live our lives in general? That's the difficult stuff, and you can only do that in a very close dialogue and conversation with the people in the city.
Yeah, it's one of my very favorite topics is to think about the way in which climate change is changing our understanding of what it actually means to be urban. What does it mean to live an urban life? And I think that's quite a fundamental change, but it's not something that we often discuss. But it is things like where, for example, would be the boundary between what constitutes a private decision or a public decision. And so is your diet any more only a private decision, or does it also have to be a public one? Anyway, that's maybe a little bit philosophical, and lunch is soon, and I don't want you all to be thinking about lunch just right now. But I very much enjoyed your remarks there about the importance of benchmarking, and I think it's one of the things that stands the climate change arena out from other arenas where cities are taking action or wanting to take action on sustainable development, is that in climate change we've got lots of different ways of thinking about our progress, and when it comes to biodiversity or plastics or ocean pollution, we're quite far behind in some of those structures and arrangements. And I wonder whether that's something that we'll see emerging in the next few years. Thank you for sharing your comments. But just to close and to get you some of your final reflections, is to think about how far, the theme of the conference is the future that we want, and it's this idea that we have these, imperatives from the science and from the global agreements about what we should be doing towards the outcomes of the Paris negotiation, the Paris Agreement that was reached. And I'm just wondering for your final thoughts on how far you think the governance approaches that you've got in place at the moment will help you achieve those goals, to take you on that journey. And I'm happy for whoever wants to go first to go first.
I think that I agree with everything's been said on this panel, and we have to measure, because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I think a very sort of holistic approach is essential, because the climate change is an existential crisis for our generation, and I think that just viewing it from an environmental lens, the theme is the global Green New Deal, this idea that we have to also think about it with a lens of economic and social justice, and I think for cities, we are just going to have to be very thoughtful, very intentional, and I think very collaborative to be successful.
Thank you. I think that the climate budget is for us the most important tool at the moment. But we have put forward a strategy for 2030, underlying that climate governance is crucial to us, and that we have to develop new tools. The budget is, of course, one of the central things. We have a good procurement strategy. Procurement is a very important thing. We have to be better addressing climate when we come to the investment policy of the city. And we have to find better ways to cooperate with national and other regional governments. And at the last but not the least, we have to develop good climate communication with all the citizens, and that is a crucial part of what we call climate governance. We have not developed all the tools yet, but we have still a way to go.
You could say that roughly there are people who believe in technology, then there are people who believe in regulation, then there are people who believe in awareness building, and I'm sure that we need all of those three. First of all, we need to convince our business society that saving the planet is also the biggest business in the world in the future in order to really pay attention and put emphasis on technology. Then we need to understand as politicians that we also need regulation, also partly to encourage the business sector to go forward. And then we need to understand that finally it's a question of behavioral change. And that's why we need them like all on board at the same time. Maybe my final point is that in the business sector, everyone tries to be like world leading, and you want to have like a breakthrough technology in order to sell your product. In our lives, you don't have. I mean, if another city has done something right or it's just to copy that. It's not that more complicated. Of course, you need to have some cities who are like the forerunners, but I mean, the Nordic cities are forerunners in some sectors, the Americans are in some other ones, the French in some third one, and that's why we need like C40 and different kind of these networks in order to really benchmark and really to ape the best practices.
Yeah. Kind of a competitive collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah, just thought or reflection. I mean, you cannot. You need, in terms of both the political leadership and the good governance, you need to. It needs to be a good sell. You cannot sell an ambition of scarcity or that you need to change your way of living to the worse. You need to make sure that this is also an agenda of hope and inspiration. And a way that we can actually improve the livability of the cities at the same time solving the climate issue. So we need to do both in order to sell this in. I mean, all the people of wealth, all of us here, we cannot ask the people that have not to deal with climate change in a way where they are not better off by doing it. So we need also to have the social aspect as a very central part of the equation here in order to make the sell.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to have time for a couple of questions from the app. 2 questions in 5 minutes. Okay, so that may mean that 2 of you should answer the one question and then 2 of you answer the other question, if that's all right. Thank you. So now I'm waiting for the question, which is quite little for me to read from here, to be honest. So I might have to stand up. Okay, so political processes are important, but can slow down climate efforts when you have extensive debate and compromise about targets, then about plans, and then about actions. Given the need to make major progress over the next 10 years, where can we streamline some of these governance processes? So in a sense, this is one of my favorite questions as well, which is what is the tension, if any, between effective governance that can be implemented quickly and inclusive governance that brings people with you? Who would like to have a go at that?
So I can go. We in Seattle have established a framework of sub-cabinets, which is essentially forcing departments to work with each other. And this may seem like a very basic idea, but I think to streamline bureaucracy by its nature is inefficient. And so if we can find a way to get these departments to collaborate, and we've done this on climate. We're doing it on electrification of our transportation sector with our utility, our transportation department, our Department of Economic Development. Each sort of, I think, short circuits the inefficiency of bureaucracy, and it's necessary for success.
Say that if you have the will, then you find the way. And I mean, we have different cultures. We have different bureaucratic administrative cultures around the world, and I'm not sure whether you should streamline all processes. I mean, the most important is that you have the political will. And then you have to find processes which adapt to your culture. And then, of course, it helps if you have some other cities which you can benchmark with yourselves.
So we'll go to the next question. Okay, so in all of your cities, how did you make a true internal engagement happen, and how do you prevent different city services working in silos? So if I could ask the other two panelists, please, to reflect on that. How do you break down those tricky silos that you find everywhere?
Yeah, exactly. It's not necessarily a specific issue only related to climate action. I think it's an issue that we need to work with every day. Again, I think that the answer is that you need a common political goal, and you need to make sure that you sort of revitalize the legitimacy of the political goals through the public debates, through the way that you are inspiring and motivating your organizations. In many ways, this is easier in terms of climate action than in many other ways where you have conflicting interests. Here you have a common interest across the board, basically. Obviously, there will be a competition for resources, but if we don't solve this, it will be much more expensive and much more difficult for all the areas. So in order, if you can put that message across, you can also actually use this common goal to tear down some of the silos.
Let me say that I think the most important thing is putting climate at the core of the decision-making process. This must be there and nowhere else, because if it's not important enough. We are struggling constantly with tearing down silos. And one of the ways that the city has chosen to do it is to create the climate agency that shall work together with all the other 51 entities. So I have a lot of friends, and I do a lot of nudging. I do a little bit of whipping, but the most important things I do is to make people talk to each other that can create the common solutions. So that's how our system will work. I'm very much in line with what was said there. We have different culture, but you have to find way through your own culture to find effective way to actually then put in place what's necessary, and political will is a good starter.
Yes. Well, thank you all very, very much for your interesting ideas, thoughtful reflections, and of course for the work that you do every day to help us get to that future that we want. It's very much appreciated. So thank you to everyone on the panel. We're not finished yet, actually. Sorry, people. We're going to have some very important closing remarks from our next speaker. Apologies, this was just over a bit of the panel, and we're going to a few closing remarks from our guest, who I'm delighted to welcome, who brings with her an enormous wealth of experience, Ms. Naoko Ishii, who's the CEO and chair of the Global Environmental Fund. Naoko, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I know that I'm standing between you and your lunch, so I will be extremely short. The reason I was invited to speak here and also that the plenary this morning is because that I'm now leading this global environment facility, which is a kind of intergovernmental institution, and then as always, intergovernmental institution actually tend to work with national government. But a few years ago, when I was very much inspired by my conversation with mayors and knowing that we need cities to act to fight against climate change, we have decided to actually change our program to do more business directly with cities. So it was actually just a few years ago. And we made actually one more that departure that we also tend to do a small projects here and there. But then we decided to move on to that and how to help city mayors to do more to help the integrated and the planning, so that just hearing for the last 1 hour that the city mayors, I feel that actually that I'm very relieved that to know that our decision a few years ago was quite right one, because they made a several important point. We need to decide ourselves and to integrate a lot of different the sectoral interest and towards that one ultimate goal. We hear the very important things such as that how to measure that otherwise you cannot manage. We also hear that transparency and in process is extremely important. So that I was very much interested in also climate budget, which is supposed to be actually also disclosed or announced that every actually 4 months or something like that. So that how does it work? I would like to know a little bit more than that. But one of the things which I also found is very interesting is that your emphasis of how to actually involve the citizens, including the most vulnerable or kind of marginalized population, as well as also the youth. This seems to me that is the core of the entire conversation, and it actually goes back to the mayor of sorry for my ignorance of the language that the location, but it's repeatedly mentioned that to how to bring that conversation more matured, and actually that many mayors and also decision makers like us and have this feel that we have already exhausted easy part of the solution. Now we are entering into the most difficult part of the solution, how we could really get over it, get through it. I think this maturity of the conversation is one of the most important things. And also that we face this quite frequent transition from one party to another, how we could really survive that kind of fluctuation. It's actually the citizens' ownership towards the climate plan. So that is fundamental to me. And this morning also at the plenary, we kind of agreed that built a consensus that what we really want to do is to how to achieve and come up with a social contract. Because what we are trying to do is a fight against climate change. It's also our relationship with nature and our planet Earth. So what we really need is how we can create this long-term social contract between human beings, the citizens, and the nature. And that requires that this matured, strategic, honest conversation between actually among ourselves. And that will survive, I guess, any kind of political fluctuation, the political change, that will make us, I believe, that to make the right decision. And Harriet, the question about this trade-off between short-term effectiveness or efficiency versus long-term strategic choice could be also at least that once we were able to mature our political strategic conversation so that we can really think this short-term cost versus long-term benefit, and if we could do it together at city place, I think that our future will be very, very bright. Thank you so much.
Well, with those very insightful comments, thank you so much for taking the time to summarize our discussion in that way. It really did, I think, bring home that key thing about how the debate really is shifting. It's not only shifting outside in the streets or in all of the different parts of society, but it's shifting in the city halls. And I think we're actually, for some good reasons, at a bit of a crossroads in where cities will be. We know that by the next Conference of the Parties, which will be held in Glasgow, small pitch for the UK there, just a tiny one, that there will be a decision being taken about the maintenance of the role of cities and other non-state actors as part of the Paris architecture going forwards. And it's really important, I think, for all of us gathered here in this meeting and over the next year to continue to make the case that climate governance cannot go back 5 years. It cannot go back into just the halls of the state-based international negotiations. We need to keep up this open agenda and the kind of platforms that we've developed to show that it's a whole of society conversation, and that conversation needs to move to that next stage. So thank you everybody for your contributions today. It is now lunchtime. I am sure that it will be environmentally appropriate and so that you can enjoy it to its full. Thank you all very much.